You've tuned into Tomcat Tales, the story of Ashland's legends from the gridiron, the court, the diamond, and beyond. It's a deep dive into Ashland Tomcat sports history. Now, here's your host, Mark Maynard.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Tomcat Tales, and today we have a really special guest, somebody who I have become very acquainted with. He actually helped me write a book about the 1967 Ashland Tomcat football state champions. And John Radjunas. He was just such a great source in this book. He was the quarterback of that great Tomcat team, and he's a fan of all Tomcats and just a great person, a great, very descriptive person. I couldn't have done that the Tragedy and Triumph book without him. That's for sure. John, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been listening to you, and I feel kind of inadequate. I've listened to some of my old heroes, and they really were. I was in the fourth and fifth grade and going down to the old gym and watching Larry Castle and Warner Caines and David Ditto Sparks and Herb Conley and Dick Fillmore. And then, of course, you did the 58 team, and you did all those with Coach Conley. And like I said, they were my first heroes, and I can't believe that I'm doing the same thing they're doing right now for you.
Well, for what it's worth, you guys were my first heroes. So, I guess that kind of comes around a little bit. Hard to believe, John. It's been 53 years ago, and 53 years ago, I guess next week, right? Since the Tomcats won in '67.
Yes, it's I don't have the date in front of me. I should, but the 24th or 5th. But either way, it'll be 53 years.
Yeah, that's a long time ago for sure. But the memories are still, I know, for you very strong, and also for a lot of Tomcat people. And I mentioned there in the introduction, Ashland's really only had two state championship teams since the playoff format started in 1959. And the first one was the 67 team. You guys, I know, had made the playoffs in '66, lost to Fort Thomas Highlands, who was, really good, as they always are. But that game kind of set the tone, didn't it? I mean, it was after that game that you guys thought, we got to work a little harder maybe and see if we can get this done.
It really was, Mark. We might not have realized it at the time, but what it was, they did have a real good team. Now, they got beat in the finals that year by Hopkinsville, where Coach Hallam had used to coach. But in that game, they had a big back named Hank Pogue, and they'd been ranked up there number 1 or 2 in the state all year, undefeated, I believe. And we didn't really know, if we could measure up to them. But doggone it, it was 27-19, and it was a close game, and really there wasn't that much difference between us. And after the game, I remember Coach Hallam sent the seniors that year on out to the bus to go back to the school, and kept us down there in the old dressing room at Putnam Stadium. And he talked for a minute, and then he left it up to us players to talk. And Paul Hill and myself got up and talked, and we decided right then that we were going to make every effort we could to do nothing but talk about winning the state championship. We thought that if we worked hard and we continued lifting weights, and we could just kind of send a message to each other, and we continued that. In other words, it wasn't something where we just talked after a game. We really did hit the weight room, and we really did talk about winning the state championship, and that if there was a spark that got us there, besides Coach Hallam, of course, it would have been that loss to Fort Thomas.
Yeah. I want to go through the season with you, but I actually want to start at the end. You all beat Elizabethtown 1914 for the championship. And, of course, that's the day that Joe Franklin was killed in the automobile accident, and several other friends and Tomcat basketball teammates and a manager were in the car with him. And I know we addressed this in the book, but everybody hasn't read the book, which is shame on them. But I know, when we talked about that, I just want people, the listeners, to know a little bit about that story. You guys didn't know when you left what had happened, right?
We didn't know at all. There was no cell phones, and and no way of contacting. The only thing we did know, a few of us, the basketball team was going on down early that morning to scrimmage Franklin County in Frankfort, and that's all we knew. But nobody paid any attention. We were getting ready to play a football game, and so whenever we left, we ate kind of a pregame meal or a morning meal or breakfast over to Blazer, and then we got on our buses and left. But we didn't know anything about it, and when we think back on it, there were a lot of little clues, but they didn't mean a thing to us. We were going through Morehead back then. The interstate wasn't totally finished. I was sitting with Tommy Lyons on the bus, and there was as right there where the old Eagle nest used to be in downtown Morehead, there was a stoplight, and we were stopped, the buses were, and looked over down about a block down, and there was this yellow Malibu Super Sport. It was mashed up terribly. And I said, "Look at her, Tommy, that looks like Joe Franklin's car." And he said, "Yeah, it sure does." Wow. And the light turned green, and off we go. And we didn't think anything. We get to the rest stop where we were going to stop and eat an apple and go to the bathroom there at the Mount Sterling restaurant. And that's exactly where the state police caught up with Coach Cole and Coach Foltz that day, the basketball team, to let them know what had happened much earlier that day. But anyway, we pulled in, and we were sitting again on the bus, and we noticed there were some of our fans pulled in, and we noticed that one of the students, and it was Teresa Fraley, and she ran into that restaurant and crying her eyes out. And I said, "Wonder what's wrong with her, Tom?" And about that time, Coach Howland gets back on the bus and says, "Guys, we're not going to stop." He said, we don't want to be late, so we're going to pass out apples here on the bus, and we're going to head on down the road." And we thought, okay, whatever the coach says, we'll do. But the reason was he had found out from that car, from those people, what had happened, and he didn't want us to know. Well, again, we dodged another bullet there from finding out, and we went on down to Louisville. And then when we got there, we pulled underneath the stands at Fairground Stadium, and we thought, he told us, "We'll go out and watch the first game if you'd like, the finish of it." And it was Mount Sterling playing Bardstown in the Class A game, and but it was raining, of course, but they had a cover on that stadium. And Coach Howland says, "Guys, we don't want you going out in the rain, so we're just going to stay here in the dressing room and go in." We thought, well, why can't we go out and watch that game, Coach? It's too early to get dressed. But we didn't say anything. Who's going to argue with the coaches? And the reason was he didn't want us mixing and mingling with any fans that might come and tell us. And we didn't know that till it was all over. So like I said, there were telltale signs of what might have happened if we'd have just known, but they kept it from us, and we didn't find out till the game was over.
Yeah. So of course, the game plays out, and we'll talk more about that too a little bit later. But the game plays out. You're ahead big at halftime, 19-0, and you go in the locker room and you come out, and E-Town's got a little bit more fire in them the second half, and you end up pulling the game out. That there was talk that maybe some of you found out at halftime, or is that vaguely true, or is that true at all? Or do you?
I didn't really know that until about 3 years ago when we had our 50th reunion there. Les Lyons told me when he came out of the game one time for a play or two, one of the managers told him. Well,
wow.
I never came out of the game for one play, and I never was on the sidelines, but most of us didn't know. Well, some of them may have found out. I didn't know a thing, and I would say it's probably about 50-50, because if a few managers found out and told some of the players, I'm sure that it spread up and down the sidelines, and I didn't know, but in regard to the difference, how well we played in the first half, and it was nearly flawless, really, probably as good as we could have played. And then in the second half, it seemed flat. We just didn't get much accomplished. And it could have been because we had the big lead and we got happy and we got lazy. It could have been because some of the kids got word about Joe and the wreck. Their minds went somewhere else. But either way, we hung on, thank goodness.
Yeah, and E-Town was a good team. Obviously, they could throw the ball well, and they were a formidable team. And I remember, I was there that night. I was a 10-year-old boy watching my hero Tomcats play, and I remember that cold, rainy night. I mean, it was not a good night to to play football or watch football, but it was it was a great win, of course, for the Tomcats. But do you think, looking back on it, had you all found out, how do you think the team would have reacted? They'd have still played the game. They're not going to cancel the game, even with that. Do you think you guys would have reacted well to playing well?
I think it would have made a big impact, negatively probably. Joe had been on the team the year before as a sophomore, and he had been a quarterback of the JV team, and we expected him to play, and he decided to give up football to play basketball only. And so David Wolf, who was one of our junior players that played, didn't start for our team in football, but he played a lot. He was on the kickoff teams and all the special teams, and also came in and ran some fullback and played some linebacker. And they were great friends. It impacted him tremendously when the game was over. I remember David just breaking down, and there would have been others that would have felt that same way, and we wouldn't have known, probably being 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, I don't know if we would have known how to react to that. And also try to keep our, how to keep our emotions up. There's no doubt that the coaches did the right thing.
Yeah, because they had the decision to make, do we tell them, do we not? And certainly they decided, okay, we're not going to tell them. And they did a great job of keeping you guys from the news, which, bad news spreads faster than any other kind of news. There's no doubt. And
it sure does.
But you got Herb Conley protecting the door. You don't really have to worry about anybody coming in either.
That's right. And he was a lot younger then too.
Yeah. So, of course, you come home the next day. Actually, well, let's go back a little bit. You said you didn't find out till after the game. How did you officially, I guess, find out, there had been an accident and Joe had been killed?
Well, you may or may not remember after the game, it was quite a celebration on the field. Fans came out, families, and the players, and we got the trophy presentation. And we were just out there having a big time on the field and got our trophy. And as we all finally cleared the field and headed in, like I said, most of us still didn't know. Some did, but might not have known the details, but just knew that something bad had happened to Joe. But either way, we go in and we're hooping and hollering in the dressing room and having a big time. And it wasn't shortly after. Most of us weren't even starting to get undressed out of our uniforms. And Coach Hallam said, "Guys, come on up here. I've got to share something with you." And we took a knee and listened to what he had to say, and he shared with us about Joe, what had happened, and you could hear a pin drop in that dressing room. It was all of us. It was just like turning a light switch off, from on to off, and that's exactly what happened. Guys started crying, guys broke down. You were stunned. You didn't know what to think, and all of a sudden, a state championship for a little while didn't matter anymore. Right.
Yeah. I was going to say, all of a sudden, all that joy turned into sorrow, just almost like you say, in an instant, really. Of course, you all spent the night in Louisville that night. And of course, it was late. It was the second game of the night, and it was. I remember I stayed with my aunt, and I can remember we didn't get to her house till after 11. It was a late, cold night. So of course, the plan was for you all to stay, I guess, and. So you're coming back, of course, come back the next day, and we've talked about the 60s, Ashland in the 60s. My goodness, the championships, the Little League, basketball, of course, this football championship. Just, it was the golden era of Tomcat sports. I think the 60s and the 30s, really. When I look back at Ashland history, there's probably not two better eras than those two eras, really. So part of the fun and winning this championship at Ashland in the 60s in particular was riding that fire truck, and getting everybody to celebrate. And, because the town was always so proud of their sports teams. Ashland is a real sports town anyway, and they love to win a state championship. And you guys, I'm sure, were looking forward to that bus ride around town.
We really were. That's an understatement, Mark. We all remembered the '61 team riding that. We had classmates with us. Our baseball teams had won it as when we were sophomores, juniors, and of course after that in our senior year, and they rode that. And we talked about that. It's kind of like one of the things we said after that Fort Thomas game. We were talking about winning a state championship. We also talked about riding that fire truck. And Paul Hill and I particularly, we used to talk many nights about, well, we're going to ride that fire truck. And of course, even after that game, and we were told that, we go to eat, we go to the motel, we spend the night. We're still thinking that tomorrow we're going to ride that fire truck. You know, we didn't think about anything like that being possibly canceled or postponed. And
right.
So you're exactly right. It was the highlight of the cherry on the Sunday, I guess you could call it. The fact that, okay, we won it, we've accomplished it, but now we're going to get to ride the fire trucks downtown Ashland and around town, and so and then of course we're coming home and we're still on the bus and we're still talking about that fire truck, and we were out of Mount Grayson, and Coach Hallam called Paul and I up. We were captains of the team, and he said, guys, they've got the band and the fire truck and the police and they're going to greet us at the city. Evidently, somehow he found out what was going on, and he said, in honor of Joe Franklin and his family, I don't know if we ought to do that. What do you all think? Well, that was putting a big a load on Paul and I. You know, that's the only thing we'd talked about for a year, and Coach Hallam was wanting us to say, okay, no, we don't do that. Well, we hemmed and hawed, both of us, without even any conference beforehand, because we didn't know what to say to him. We knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't know how to answer him on this. And he said, well, guys, I think that we shouldn't do that. And of course we go back to our seats, and when we pulled in, sure enough, right there out by the Rose Hill Cemetery, where all those past champions had met and got off the bus and onto the fire truck there. There was the fire truck. There was the police. There was fans lined on the up and down the 13th Street there as you came in, and the band was there in their bus to play and go on, and we went right on by them and turned in to go to Blazer, and so that was, of course, we went over to Blazer, and the mayor was, I think Mayor Gartrell was the mayor at the time, and he was there and said a few words when we got off the bus. The band played the school song right there in front of the Blazer gym lobby, and Coach Hallam said a word, and then we went in through the lobby into the dressing room and put our gear up, and then got in our cars and went home. That was it. Yeah,
no bus ride, no really extra celebration. I mean, no celebration really. And you know, it's interesting to me that they didn't do something later, but they didn't. I mean, I don't know, different times, I guess. I think today they would make sure there was still some kind of celebration or some kind of something or other. But you know, and you know, for you guys, for Ashland, it was okay. It was on to basketball season, and you know, they're certainly you're mourning Joe's death. And did you guys all go to the funeral too and all that?
Yes, and it was we didn't go as a group, but I can't remember anybody that wouldn't have gone on their own, because they all had their own special relationships with Joe and their family, and some were pallbearers and et cetera. And so yes, and that was another thing when you say celebrating afterwards. You know, that death was an impact, and that was Thanksgiving weekend, and we come back to school on Monday, and I don't remember the day of the funeral, but yes, many went, but we came back, and people still felt like, well, that would be a little bit of disrespect maybe to the family if we did celebration. I think we might have had a little bit of a pep rally of some sort where they presented the trophy to the school, and that was about it. But there wasn't any kind of a citywide thing, and so yeah, it was a downer for us, and but it was a down time too.
Right. It was nobody's fault. It's just the way it was, and you know, the Franklin family probably wouldn't have minded a celebration, but at the same time, you do want to, you know, you do feel for them. I mean, and you had the other guys that were in that car accident too. You know, that were amazingly nobody else was killed, really. I mean, because that was a horrendous accident that happened, but. So that, of course, that culminated that season, but you know, getting to that point is a story on all in itself too. And I know we talked in the book about Camp Arrowwood, and I want you to talk a little bit about that because there's some great stories with that, of course. But of course, this is the pre-season training camp that they took you to, and you know, teams didn't really. That was one of the first times Ashland had really done that, I think. I mean, maybe the year before you all did it, but I'm not sure that was a thing yet, you know. But it sure was during the era when you played.
Yeah. Hey, no team I know of, any Tomcat team had ever done it. Coach Allen came in '66, and he said, we're going to camp. Well, at first we thought that sounded like a real neat idea. We're all going to have to go to camp and have fun like you would when you go to Boy Scout camp or something. And it was Camp Arrowhead, and it was up in West Virginia. Matter of fact, very, very close to where the now Huntington Mall is. That's where we turned off to go to it, but there wasn't any mall at that time. But anywhere, it was in that neighborhood, which is too far away to walk home, and but close enough yet that you. But yet there were still several that went home, especially after the first year when we were there. But we went up there. But I'll give you this little short summary of what a day was like. We lived in tents. We lived in tents with grass floors. Some of them were lucky enough to get one of those wooden plank floors, but most of us had grass floors. And you had your equipment, and you didn't have any washer and dryers, so what you wore all week, you just hung out over the tent or on a makeshift line and hoped it dried out for the next practice. And we stunk pretty bad by the end of that week. But we would practice 4 times a day, Mark. I know that sounds outrageous, and you couldn't do that today. You couldn't possibly do that with any kids nowadays. But we got up in the morning about 6 o'clock, and the practice was about a 30-minute practice. And all we did was huddled up 3 different teams, the first team, second team, third team, and we ran offensive plays. And you had to run 25 perfect plays without somebody dropping the ball, without somebody jumping off sides, without any kind of mistake. And when you ran 25 straight, not without a mistake, you had to start back to 1 if you made a mistake. Then you could go eat breakfast. You could go down and get out of your stuff and go eat breakfast. Well, sometimes that took a lot of plays to run to get 25 straight perfect plays. And that's all we did. I don't know what the objective was except get us up and get us awake. And then we go eat breakfast, and we get to go lay down for about an hour back in those nice hot tents. And and then we'd practice about 9:30 for 2 hours, and then we'd go to lunch. And those were hard 2-hour practice, full pads, and then we'd go to lunch, and we get about an hour and a half maybe, and then we'd practice again like at 3:30 for 3 or 3:30, whatever time it was, in the heat of the day. This was August, and it'd be another 2-hour full pad practice, and then we go eat supper, and we could jump in the pool. There was a pool up there by it for a little bit, but then we had to go back, lay down for about a half hour, and back out in helmets and shorts for the evening practice, which was around 7:30, and all we did in the evening was work on kicking game, and that was usually about a 45-minute practice. We did that for 5 straight days, and then we'd take that old smelly stuff, put it back on, and on the way home, we would stop at Barberville. Both years that we were at camp, we stopped and scrimmaged Barberville on Saturday morning coming home, and we stunk to high heaven, and we were tired. We didn't feel like scrimmaging anybody. I sometimes attribute that to why that's where Smokey Ingram broke his ankle in that scrimmage up there. But you know, we weren't sharp. But anyway, we scrimmaged, and then we were home sometime Saturday evening, and that was some people might call that hell week, but it was close to it.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I can only imagine how rough that was, and I mean it wasn't like you got water as a treat either, because that back in those days, you got salt tablets more than you got water.
We never had a water break. No such thing. No, we didn't get any water break until practice was over.
Yeah, you mentioned Smokey Ingram, of course. Smokey, I guess he was probably one of the starting halfbacks, right? At the time, he was one of the faster guys on the team.
And Steve Scott definitely were probably two of the fastest on the team. And Smokey had a great spring the spring before, and he came out and lifted weights and had great preparation in August. We go to camp. The backfield at that particular time was Steve Scott, Smokey Ingram, and Paul Hill. And there wasn't a need to move left lines back there like we did later in the year.
Right.
And then here we are. We came back from camp. We had already scrimmaged Harrison County before we went to camp and got beat pretty bad. And then we go to camp and we scrimmage Barberville, and we're just like 7 or 8 days away from, maybe just a week away from our first game. And that's when Smokey broke his ankle.
Yeah, I guess he hit a hole there or something, you think, or did they ever figure out what happened?
We were at Barberville, and we were scrimmaging on their field. He actually, it was a weird accident. Larry Webb, during a play, as tackles and blocks were being made, et cetera, Larry rolled up on Smokey's ankle, and it broke it, one of our own players.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he never returned, right? I mean, he didn't ever get well enough to play.
Not really. He did come back probably about the last game of the season against Raceland, and he ran the ball, I know, 4 times against Belfry in our second playoff game. He got going, but he was not full speed. He was limping. But I think it was kind of a token. Okay, Smokey, doctor says you can play. I mean, he would have never been ready to start a game, but he did get to get in 1 or 2 games.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'll see that. 4 carries for 10 yards, it says in my records for that season. But it's interesting how things happen. Of course, like you said, the Harrison County game. Of course, Harrison was highly rated, highly regarded, and they wore you guys out at Putnam Stadium in a scrimmage, and kind of that was another. A line in the sand, I guess, for that season, wasn't it?
It really was. Coach Hallam had arranged for us to scrimmage Harrison, and they came to Putnam Stadium. And Coach Conley had coached at Harrison County for 2 years prior to coming back to Ashland, and he knew their coaching staff extremely well, knew the players for Harrison County extremely well, and they were preseason number 1. They ended up being the number 1 team in some polls all during the course of the year. People don't realize now Harrison County was a much bigger school then, and they had a lot more athletes, as some schools have across the state. Some have shrunk and some have gotten bigger in enrollment. But Harrison County was a state power there for 4 or 5 years, and they were so they came up. Now another thing about that scrimmage. Paul Hill didn't play in that scrimmage. Tommy Lyons didn't play in that scrimmage. And Les Lyons didn't play in that scrimmage. They all had minor injuries. Now, you're taking 2 all-state players and another one that was a pretty doggone good football player out. But still, they whipped us pretty good that day. I don't know. They probably scored about 7 or 8 times, and I don't know if we ever scored in that scrimmage. And their coach made some disparaging remarks to Coach Conley. About this is all you got, Coach, and it was a eye opener for us. In other words, we realized right then, hey, we know we're pretty good. We know we could have a good team. Well, we better get to be a lot better.
Yeah. If we're going to win this thing, this is we got to beat a team like this. So we better improve a lot in a hurry. So of course it's always a long season, and you all go to camp and you get back from camp, and the first game is actually at Putnam Stadium, and it's against Everett, a mountain team. And they those mountain schools, man, they can hit you, that's for sure. But you guys held them to 99 yards of offense, and I think that kind of set a little tone for what kind of team this was going to be. Really, a great defensive team. You're ranked number 12 preseason coming into this game, and this was considered a district game, and you beat Everett's 19-0. You have any recollections of that game?
Yeah, I do. I think the best way to describe the way we felt was we were scared to death. We were scared to lose. But we knew, again, we had a good team. We knew that we had the makings of a good team. And but the year before, our first game was against Fleming Neon, another mountain school, who ended up going 9-1, and they were Class A, but they had and they beat us 18-7. We remembered that, and Everett's was just down the road from Fleming Neon up there, one in Letcher County, I think one in Harlan County, but we were scared to lose is what it was, and we went out, and I think we had a few penalties and against us, jumping off sides as you do in your first game, but Tony Mulvaney was kind of the hero of the night. He was the one that, as Tony did 2 or 3 times during the year, and people don't remember much about Tony, and Mike Johnson, I remember, had big interception, but when you look at the stats, as you just said, Mark, we pretty much dominated them. I don't remember that the score was only 19-0, but I don't think they ever came close to scoring. We had a lot more first downs. We had a lot more rushing yards, and it was just our first shutout. And we had 6 that year. And you're right. We knew we had big, strong running backs. We knew we had a big old line. But what won for us really was our defense. Our defense was what won a state championship for us that year, and that's where it started, right there, shutting out Everett.
Right. I don't think there's any doubt that the defense was the hallmark of this team. Defense, and like you say, big and strong, and defense. I think they all kind of go together for sure. You all outrushed them 273-50 in that game. I mean, Mulvaney had a 50-yard touchdown run to put y'all ahead 13-0 at the half, and 19-0. It was a competitive game, but like you said, not really threatened. A good win. And the next week, though, and this was. You got Boyd County, and Boyd County had just laid it on you guys at Putnam Stadium in '66, 34-14, and that was the first time Boyd County beat Ashland ever, or do you know?
Ashland in any sport up to that time.
Wow.
And we led in that game 14-13 in the fourth quarter, and they beat us 34-14. And but anyway, it was an embarrassment, and it was, and we felt it all year long, and we wanted to beat them very badly. And to this day, we did win 16-0. But and you know how you feel about rivals; they never go away. You always want to beat Tennessee if you're Kentucky, or you want to beat Indiana basketball. You want to beat, and still, I know Ashland Boyd County is a big rival. And I just felt like when we won 16-0, we wanted to be 36-0. And the stats in that game showed that it could have been. Steve Scott, I think, ran for 200 and some yards in that game. And at that time, Mark, that was I think a school record, rushing single game record at that particular time. I think it's been surpassed now by a couple guys, but at that time it was. And Paul kicked his first field goal, and there's another story about us being late for the game that's it's interesting, but I just wish that I wish that score would have been higher than 16-0, even though that was number 2 shutout of the year, and the defense again prevailed as it did every game for us.
Oh yeah, a dominating game. Really, you all ran for 348 yards. My goodness, and Scott, as you said, he had 28 carries for 219 yards. Mulvaney had another long touchdown run, 22 yards, and you guys really never had it in that game either. Never really threatened. I mean, Boyd, struggled on that to gain yardage. So you're 2-0, and that's all good, of course. Being always good to be 2-0. And Catlettsburg is next, and another game at Putnam Stadium. You guys are rising in the rankings now. You're up to number 10 in the AP poll, and you're playing Catlettsburg. And Catlettsburg, in the 60s in particular, they were pretty good. I mean, they had a pretty nice team, really. And I was trying to see what y'all did to them and with them in '66. I know you beat them, but
it's about 33-0, I think.
Yeah, it was. Well, this one was 33-7. You gave up your first score, and that was in the third quarter of that game. So you started the season with 10 consecutive shutout quarters, which is pretty impressive. But you rushed for 434 in this game, and really Scott had 144. Just a real, very dominating game, really, as the other two have been.
They were, Steve did have 144, but I think Paul had 163 yards and 4 TDs in that game. But Coach Hallam, I won't say tried to scare us. He did scare us in this game. At the time, we didn't know it, but Callisburg ended up with a winning record that year, and they beat Boyd County and they beat Russell and they tied Raceland that year. Callisburg did have a nice team that year, and they had a kid named Hawk, I think was the quarterback.
Yeah, Mike Hawk.
And maybe if I'm thinking correctly, Roger who was the basketball coach at Boyd County?
Yeah, Roger Zorns, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Roger Zorns, I'm sorry. Roger was, I think he was on that team and for Callisburg. But either way, they were good, and he did try to scare us, and it worked because we went out and played a pretty good game and controlled the line of scrimmage again, and we probably were, at that time, we were thinking our defense was pretty good, and we were a little disappointed they scored 7 points on us. But Callisburg was a different team then than they were a couple of years later. They were heading downhill as far as enrollment and so on, but this was probably their last last hurrah for the football team. There's 67 Callisburg.
Yeah, that was really their last good team. You mentioned Roger Zorns. He actually threw for 140 yards in that game. He was 8 of 18 passing, and Hawk was 11 of 20. So your pass defense got tested a little bit. They were 20 of 40 in that game for 189 yards. So, but they couldn't run against you guys, and nobody seems to be able to run against this Tomcat team. You had such great defensive linemen and linebackers. It's no wonder. There was a lot of meat up there up front and a lot of strength. So tough for anybody to gain any yards against you guys.
Well, you're right, Mark. And philosophies have changed over the years. We ran a 6-2 defense back then. We had 6 defensive down linemen and 2 linebackers, and then we had a 3 deep secondary. And but no, hardly anybody was a predominantly throwing team back there. Today, everybody seems to be a predominantly throwing team. You can't run a six-man front with 2 linebackers, only 3 deep secondary against teams of today because you'll get thrown to death. I mean, they'll just eat you apart in the secondary. And so when you put big people like we had up there, in essence, 8 people up front, it made it very difficult for teams to run. Now, in today's defenses, you see a 3-man front, a 4-man front, sometimes a 5-man front, but you still almost always have 4 deep in the secondary because of the threat of the pass nowadays. There wasn't that much of a threat back in 1967.
Right. Yeah. Nobody was passing. Everybody was. It was almost a scrum almost. Who had the strongest runners? Who had the strongest line? Who was going to prevail in most cases. Stonewall Jackson, the number 3 team in West Virginia, comes to Putnam Stadium the following week, and I know you guys knew you were in for a battle with them. They're always good. It's just a traditional. It's one of those traditional powers in West Virginia, really, during that era in particular. And Ashland had played them a lot through the years, so it wasn't like they were like an unfamiliar foe. You guys knew what you were facing.
Yeah, we played them every year. I mean, for a long time now. Stonewall Jackson is consolidated into Capitol High up there, and with Charleston High and Stonewall Jackson consolidated. That's a big school. But back then we played them every year. They beat us 14-7 the year before in a real tough game. We took the lead in this game 3-0 in the first quarter. Paul Hill kicked a field goal in the first quarter, and we hung on until the fourth quarter. And they had a guy named Harry Sugar Bear Lyles, who was probably the best football player I ever played against. And then I played against him 4 more years when I was at East Tennessee. He played for Coach Hallam at Morehead and made all OVC. He was one heck of a football player, and particularly defensively. He was a linebacker that just didn't want to be blocked, and you couldn't block him, and he made tackle after tackle. But anyway, they got 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns, and it was a tough one to take, but actually they probably outplayed us. And that night they were the better team. It was a hard pill to swallow when you'd gone 3-0 and had visions of grandeur in your head, and then all of a sudden you get knocked back a step.
Yeah, and they ran for 210, which was by far more than anybody ran against you guys all season, probably. But they were pretty good. And Lyles, as you said, he dominated the game. And I remember talking to Bill Culbertson, your all-state center, who said he was just impossible to block. I mean, the guy was just, he was that good. He just was, and he just was all over Putnam Stadium. Probably, maybe one of the best defensive nights anybody has ever had against the Tomcats was Sugar Bear in that game for sure. And I can see why Hallam he kind of scooped him up late too in that in the spring when I think West Virginia or somebody kind of reneged on a scholarship offer to him, and Hallam was able to grab him, and man, he was a great player for Morehead State too. He would have been a great player for West Virginia if they'd let him go.
Bobby Bowden was coaching at West Virginia at that particular time, and they recruited him heavily. And then I don't know if it was grades, I don't know what it was, but they decided that he couldn't come. Marshall also recruited him, and there were a lot of people that did. And Coach Hallam gets the job at Morehead and signs him. And like I said, he ended up being one of the best linebackers they ever played in the OVC. Yeah,
just a great player. So a loss on the ledger, but at the same time, that's a great team. You guys come back and you go, it's another home game against Covenant Catholic. And, I remember that season too, John, and it seemed like it rained every Friday night. I mean, it was a wet season for some reason, a wet year of Friday nights. Covenant Catholic, they came in unbeaten, I think, coming into that game. You guys were ranked 11th, and this is your homecoming game. And Zoanne Davis was the homecoming queen. I'm sure you remember that. But,
I do remember Zoanne. Back in those days, we had the dance after the game on Saturday, so she didn't really get crowned until Saturday night at the dance. But they paraded around in cars, all the girls that were attendants and so on. Yeah. But we came back, and I don't know if it was a revenge thing or because we'd gotten beat the week before, or we were just that much better, beating Covington Catholic 30-0, and we registered another shutout. And Steve Scott had a huge game that night, I remember. And I lucked out and did a couple of things right that night. And Paul kicked the field goal, and I think we held them to something like minus 20 yards rushing. I mean, they were never in the game. We totally dominated them, and it was a great homecoming win.
Yeah, y'all they threw the ball a little bit, but you picked off 3 of them, and they only completed 7. They were 7 for 21 and had minus 20 rushing, and really never threatened in that game. We've talked about Paul kicking some field goals, and I love the story you tell about how Paul became the Tomcat kicker.
Well,
so let's hear that one.
Well, in the off season, we didn't have a kicker the year before. I remember when I was a sophomore, Jimmy Ward drop kicked. I don't know if you ever done a story on that or not, but he actually was a drop kicker, and for Coach Miller, his last year coaching, Jimmy Ward kicked, I don't know how many, but several, and he was. But we didn't really have a kicker the next year. We didn't have one. We went for 2. Well, we didn't go for 2. We just tried to run it or pass it because you couldn't go for 2. It was one whether you kicked it or ran it or passed it back then. But so Paul and I, we got a couple of footballs, and we'd go climb the fence to Putnam Stadium. And if people remember, down at the end of the Putnam Stadium, there used to be a little house down there that was the guy that was a maintenance of the stadium and Putnam Junior High School, Speedy. We always called him Speedy. And he lived in that house. And of course, after you were out there a while, he'd always come and run us out. And we'd kick. But anyway, at one time when I guess Speedy wasn't home and we got to kick a few, Paul and I said, okay, whoever makes the first one is going to be the kicker, and whoever doesn't make the first one is going to be the holder. Well, Paul, he wasn't going to let me kick one until he made one. He missed one or two, and I said, my turn. No, I'm going to kick till I make one. I said, you can't do that. And he said, I can do whatever I want. And
and he could.
And sure enough, he finally made one, so I was the holder. And that's the way it ended up. And, the funny thing, if you'll notice in our stats, there's some games where we still ran it, or we passed it, or he kicked one or two, or we'd run. Coach Hallam wasn't totally sold on that kicking extra points. He was old school, and he wasn't sure if that was the thing we ought to be doing. And finally, Paul kept making enough that he finally said, okay. And obviously, he won the McHale game for us by kicking 3 extra. He won the Harrison County game, in essence, by kicking 3. And back then, they were behind 8 points, and you couldn't get but 7. And so he became a real weapon. And, of course, then he had enough confidence to let him try field goals, and he made 3 or 4 of those during the year. And so that was the way it happened.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So you go to Hazard for your next game. That's another district game. Hazard really not a great team, but you have a great game in that night. You connected with Mulvaney on 60 and 38-yard touchdown passes, 3 for 117 yards. One of your better passing nights for sure, because you guys just didn't throw that much. It wasn't your fault. You just didn't throw it. It wasn't even need to when you could run with the hosses you all had. And you ran for 45 in that game too. So were defense is starting to maybe kind of pile up in the front and try to stop the running game a little bit, or how did that passing lane open up so much? You actually threw 3 touchdown passes in that game.
Hazard really, really did. It was a cold, damp night, and if people might remember, in the old days, Hazard's before their new field now, there was no grass on their field, and I mean that. You might have found 4 or 5 blades of grass in each end zone, and that'd be about it. It was dirt, and it was a miserable place to play back in those days. And when we came out, of course, we'd been running the football like crazy. They had an 11-man front. I mean, that's where they had about a 8-man down and 2 linebackers and kind of one guy maybe drifting in the secondary. And we had a little trouble in the first quarter moving the ball. And it made the passing game, finally Coach Hallam and Coach Conley and them decided that, hey, we're going to have a hard time throwing if they're going to run an 11-man line on us, 11-man front. And of course, I opened up Tony Mulvaney and Mike John caught touchdown passes and made it very easy for me that night. And I do remember that Coach Hallam wasn't happy with the first half. At halftime, he gave us the Dickens in the locker room because he didn't think we were playing hard. Of course, it was a long bus ride back in those days up to Hazard. Still is, but I guess we were tired.
Just looking at this box, I was just going to say, just look at this box. You guys were actually behind 7-6 early in the second quarter, and you didn't take the lead for good till about almost 6 minutes to go in the first half. And you were quite a bit better than Hazard, so I'm sure he was not happy, about that.
No. He wasn't at all, and of course we came out and performed better, and plus also they figured out how we could get around that 11-man front and by throwing the ball a little bit, but we got things corrected, and but again I think when we talk about their defense, I think they only had 20-some yards rushing the whole night, and again our defense, we did some good things offensively, and we did dominate, but our defense was the key to our football team.
Yeah, I just noticed this that fourth quarter you all scored with 44 seconds to go on a 19-yard pass. And that was John's touchdown from you. So they weren't convinced that you all need to let's keep these guys in there. They need to play a little longer, and you got a touchdown pass. Of course, I'm sure they kept the 11-man line up and said, you're not going to run on us, but really they didn't really stop you all at 224 yards rushing. So the next week it's back to Putnam Stadium, and you guys are moving up in the rankings again. You're number 9. You're playing Ironton, and anytime Ashland plays Ironton, I don't care. It's a war. It's and I think you guys were really better than Ironton that year. You really hammered them, I think, in '66, and maybe thought this game was going to be a little easier than it was. And actually, Ironton probably outplayed you guys. I mean, not maybe not totally, but it ended up 7-0. Only one touchdown in the game, and that was a Scott touchdown late in the third quarter. So scoreless game for almost 3 quarters.
Yeah, Mark, it was a typical Iron game. The year before we had beaten them pretty easily, and maybe that was what didn't get us totally ready for the game. But they did probably outplay us, and I remember Larry Johnson had a big game at linebacker in that game, but we got our fourth shutout, and we finally ran the ball some in the second half and got control of the game. And I remember, I tell you what I remember, and anytime you have something personally good happen to you, you're going to remember things. They were threatening to score. They were down maybe to the 35-yard line going in, and with hardly any time left, they threw a pass. I intercepted it on about the 5-yard line, and the clock ran out, and that was it. I remember Coach Birch running out, patting me on the back, and all. But we escaped. That was the best thing to say about the Iron game. We shut them out. It was our fourth shutout, but we escaped because it could have gone either way.
Yeah, Dave Spears and Phil Murnahan had 118 and 114 yards rushing, respectively, there, and you were lucky to get out of there with a win. And like you say, another shutout. You come back the next week, you go to Louisville Western. Louisville Western hadn't won a game, and you beat them pretty bad, 29-0. They only get one first down in the game. I thought that was pretty remarkable. I covered a million games, not really a million, but I've covered hundreds of games, and there was only one time in my career where a team did not get a first down. And the strangest thing about that, John, is that team that didn't get a first down won the game. And I doubt that's ever happened any time in history. And that was Pineville beat Paintsville 8-6 in a playoff game in 1976 or 77 maybe. I don't know, one of those 2 years. But yeah, Pineville does not get a first down, and they beat Paintsville 8-6. But I just noticed this, that Western only had one first down. Really a dominating game. You scored 2 touchdowns on quarterback sneaks, I guess, probably because it was 1-yard run, 3-yard run, or whatever, close in runs there. But pretty easy win. We'll move on from that one to McKell, and of course this is McKell with Don Gullett. They were ranked 15th in the AP poll, but back then they ranked everybody in one poll, I think. I don't think they broke it down by class. And, McKell was, maybe, if not the best team in Class A, they were close, and of course Don Gullett, he was a junior, I think, that year. Yeah, pretty sure that's right. Yeah, he was a junior that year, but he was a man, wasn't he? I mean,
he was a great athlete, one of the greatest athletes of our area around Ashland that's ever been there. He was a heck of a basketball player too, and of course we already know about his baseball abilities. Yeah. But it was a close game. But and we did have a great drive at the end of the game to win it. But if you look at the stats, we did again. We totally dominated the game as far as running it and even passing it that game, if I'm not mistaken. Paul Hill had one of his best games running of the year. Maybe not the most yards he picked up, but he picked them up at the key times that we needed it in that game. One thing you remember, funny things about games, I remember Bill Culbertson blocking a punt and blocked it and then caught it and ran it for about 50 yards for a touchdown. And I remember Larry Stambo was a junior defensive guard. He had a big game that game. You remember funny things, but that was a hard game. They were the only team to score 3 touchdowns on us in the whole season.
Oh yeah, I mean that tells you a lot about them to me. That they. And Gullett scored all 3 of them, but not that I mean, obviously had a pretty good line in front of him. But they take the lead, John, with 5:40 to go. They're ahead of you guys, and 20 to 14 because they'd missed an early extra point. They missed their first kick in the first quarter when they went ahead 6-0. But what a great game! Gullett ends up with 80 yards rushing, and I've seen video of that game. And man, that guy, he was so strong. I mean, just dragging people because your old defense was on him, but he was just hard to stop. I mean, that's just all there is to it. Did Steve Scott get hurt in that game, or did he just not?
Well, I don't remember exactly because did he carry the ball at all in that game? Steve?
3 carries for 5 yards, which is not.
There was a time in the season where Steve had, ironically, he ended up being killed because of a motorcycle accident. But he was riding a motorcycle during the season. Actually, Paul Hill was too on the same weekend, and both of them had motorcycle wrecks at different places. But Steve was a little more severe. It caused him to miss part of a game, and it might have been this one. And once Paul found out that Coach Hallam had really gotten all over Steve for riding that motorcycle, Paul didn't even tell him that he'd been in one. So, but that's probably the game that Steve didn't play much in. But you talked about that last drive. I'll never forget it because Coach Hallam called a timeout and about 5 minutes to go in the game, and we had at least 70 yards still to go. And I remember saying, Coach Hallam, don't call any more timeouts. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, Paul's got to have a timeout to tie his shoe up. Paul used to tie his shoe up with a string. He'd tie the toe up and then tie it around his back of his calf, so it forces his foot to be locked in the kicking position. And sometimes we took a timeout for him to kick an extra point. Sometimes we didn't. But I said, save that extra point for that. Well, sure enough, we marched down the field, and I think Paul carried it, I'll bet you 8 or 9 times. Les Lyons might have carried it 1 or 2, and I'm not sure, but I remember Paul was carried, and we went down and we scored, and we took a timeout. Paul tied his cleat up and kicked the extra, and we won 21-20.
Yeah. I know McHale still says, they got some bad calls. They got. I've talked to those guys, and that game really sticks in their craw. Let me tell you, they did not like losing that game at all. McHale ends up getting upset, I think, in the semis, maybe or first round of the playoffs. I think who was it? Mount Sterling, I think, maybe beat them.
They only lost 3 games that year. They lost to Harrison County, they lost to Ashland, and then they lost to Mount Sterling in the semifinals. Yeah.
So, and I know they were disappointed with that, because they did have a great team. They came back the next year and had a great team as well, obviously. And, tough, hard-nosed guys, there's no doubt about it. You guys come back the next week, you're playing at Russell, and, this is before Russell had never beaten Ashland. In fact, they didn't beat them until 1970 for the first time. But this game was not even close. It was 51-6. Russell had 1 yard rushing, so they tried to throw it a little bit, but pretty much just dominating game. Really, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. Culbertson had you're right about that block punt. That was huge in that game, in that McHale game. I mean, you don't get that, maybe you don't win the game.
Right.
But the next week he gets an interception return for a touchdown as well. So he had a couple of touchdowns there that nobody would have ever thought, he would have done that. He was able to do that.
Mark, that game there, it doesn't seem like it. We won so easily, and we were better than Russell. But it was a game where I think our team came together. We had gotten over the hump with McHale. We'd had the tough game with Stonewall. We had a tough game with Ironton. And we came together that week. It was a team effort. Briar Moffitt scored. Bill Culbertson, as you said, scored. 14 players for us in that game, I think, ran the ball. And we had, it was a total dominant. But I think as a team, we said, okay, we're over the hump, and we're on our way now. We've got this real legitimate shot to win a state championship, and I think we took it out on Russell.
Yeah. You had the perfect passing efficiency that game. You were 4 for 4 and 137 yards, and Mulvaney was your favorite target. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And, of course, he was a game breaker kind of guy, and he had a long touchdown reception from you, 34 yards. But just like I say, dominating game. And you guys move on to play Graceland, and this is the last regular season game. You don't know at this point. Nobody knows for sure, if you're going to even get in the playoffs because it's just a crazy system, the way the whole thing, that Dickinson point system, which was kind of wacky. You guys were ranked 6th in the AP poll, but, it really looked like, John, this might be it. This season's going to end. You're going to be 10-1 and all dressed up and no place to go. You do take care of business and you beat them, but 26-6. But talk about that a little bit.
Well, my thoughts on that, it was a downer going into the game because we already knew there was a possibility. We learned that week there was a possibility of no playoffs. people don't remember. Then you had to win your district to be in the playoffs. You couldn't be runner-up. You couldn't be third. You couldn't be fourth. You had to win your district. And also the districts were so big back then that you couldn't play every team in your district. And that year we had been moved back into Fort Thomas's district, and we couldn't. Our schedule, we couldn't get all of the teams on the district, the ones that were important. Fort Thomas had lost 3 games that year, but because of that Dickinson system, if they beat Campbell County that last game, even though they were going to be 7-4, we were going to be 10-1. They were going to get to go, and we knew that possibility. And I think Raceland might have even taken a 6-0 lead on us. We were flat. It was a home game, and it was a moist night. The field wasn't perfect. Yeah. We were flat. Finally, when it was all over, Paul and Les Lyons had big nights running the ball, and we finished the season 10-1. I think Raceland only rushed for like 10 or 15 yards in the game, and
14. Yeah,
but we didn't play well. We go back over to the stadium. We're putting things up, and we think that we're not going to go because we just figure Highlands is going to beat Campbell County. And then, of course, actually some of the players dressed and left. Paul Hill was one of them. He went in and kind of told Coach Allen, he said, "You promised me if we worked hard, we'd get to play for a state championship." Coach Allen said, "Well, Paul, he told me many times after he felt so bad because Paul left. Paul was one of the first ones out there that night, and then the word came that in the mud down at Campbell County they upset Highlands 6-0, and we were champs. Well, that's when we hit that swimming pool over at Blazer. We were through the coaches again. Some of us still had our pants on, our football pants. That pool was brown from mud. It looked like the Ohio River after a big rain. And some of the guys had already left and didn't even know it. But we found out late that night that we were district champs.
Yeah. So that was the good news. The bad news, maybe Harrison County was going to be your first opponent. And I don't know. I guess it was just even an odd thing, but you all ended up with a couple of home games in the playoffs that year. You played, and Harrison County was the first one. Of course, everybody's remembering how Harrison County, maybe not all of Ashland, but you guys for sure remember, scrimmage in Harrison County, and oh my, they're undefeated coming into this game. They're 11-0. They're ranked number 2 in the state AP poll anyway. And this is going to be tough. It's going to have to be the game of your all's lives to beat them.
Absolutely. And the team knew we scrimmaged and got whipped by them back in August, but most people didn't know much about scrimmages back then, but we knew. But by that time we had, like I said, came together in that Russell game, then we beat Raceland, and we find out we're district champs. We know that Paul Hill, and we know that Les Lyons, and we know that Tommy Lyons didn't play in the scrimmage against Harrison County. And we felt like, okay, it's going to be our time to shine. We believe. And then I have to give Coach Conley, Coach Hallam, and Coach Birch the tip of the hat in this one. They studied. They had every film on Harrison County. From Tuesday on, we were watching films of them. We knew every move. We were calling out their plays when they came up. Matter of fact, sometime in the first quarter, when they got in certain formations, we knew that they were going to do 1, 2, or 3 of things. Or 1, 2 of things, or sometimes in a certain formation, they were only going to do one certain thing. And we were calling those out. Our linebackers, our defensive secondary were calling out, this is where it's going to come. I remember their quarterback, Ricky Chastain, who became a friend of mine years later. We refereed basketball games together. He called timeout. And he said, before he even got over the sideline, he said, "Coach, they know what we're running." And that actually happened. And we did know what they were running. But they had some great athletes. It didn't matter if we knew or not. If we couldn't stop those speedsters, we weren't going to win. But again, if you study the stats, we dominated the game. In other words, they were a great team, but we dominated the game in first downs and rushing and maybe the unsung hero in that game, because we talk about Steve Scott and we talk about Paul Hill. Paul didn't play in this game, by the way. When he had a hurt ankle, the only thing he did was kick. So we played without Paul in this game, and but left lines had a big night, and Tony Mulvaney on a little counter play. We called it, I think, fake drive 3 counter at 6, and we'd fake to the fullback, fake to the other back, and Tony come on a counter. And 3 times during that game, he broke it for big first downs, all in the fourth quarter. And but it came together for us in that game too, especially in the second half. We took over. They couldn't get the ball back. We were running the ball, getting first down after first down, and they probably were the best team, including Stonewall. But we played Stonewall early. This is the 12th game of the year. Everybody's playing at their best. Talent-wise, I think Harrison County was definitely the best team.
Yeah. So, like you say, though, you won this game even and wrestled for 295 yards without Paul Hill, who just was a bruiser who you could count on for 70 to 125 yards every time out. And that game too, you scored twice in the fourth quarter. You guys are behind 13-7 going into the fourth quarter, and you scored twice in the fourth quarter to pull the upset. And, from what I have been told, that game maybe had more people at it than any game in Putnam Stadium history. That the town was just like, they were ready to play, to cheer for the Tomcats that night. And the game was, of course, Jake, nobody could pump up a crowd and pump up fans and teams too, for that matter, I guess, like Jake Hallam. I mean, he had the whole town geared up to play that game.
He really did, Mark. I could go on and on about some of the little things that he did. He was student council advisor. He had everybody make little badges for the kids to wear at school, and they'd pass them out in their homerooms. There was a kid from each homeroom. We had badges on. There were signs made downtown in the businesses that beat Harrison County, and you've seen some of those at our reunions, I know. And then we had citywide pep rallies down at Central Park, down there right on the infield of CP1 number 1 Diamond. They had bonfire, and those were all things that Coach Hallam instigated and got going. And as far as the crowd, I know Coach Conley has said that several times. He thinks it's the biggest crowd he ever remembers seeing. And only one I can remember, of course, I haven't, in my latter years, I haven't been back to all the games, but I did come back and watch Ashland play Bell County in that 1990 season. And I remember then that was a full house too. But as a player looking up, there just wasn't any room. You didn't see any space anywhere, including the end zone, including people standing up. It was, it was our second ever playoff game in Ashland's history. The year before, we lost to Fort Thomas, and it was a home game. And people had hopes. They really had hopes that this team might have a chance. And if we can beat this Harrison County outfit, we might win a state championship. And that's the exact way we felt, and we did.
Yeah, I agree with that. The 90 Bell County game, that was the biggest crowd I can remember as a writer covering it. And maybe some of the Ironton Ashland games, which were big. But, just from what you guys were saying about this game, and I was at the game, but, again, I was 10 years old, so who knows, what a 10-year-old thinks about a crowd like that. But the next week you're still home and you're playing Belfry. Belfry is they're ranked number 22. You guys are ranked number 9. You're coming off the big game though, and but you knew what was at stake. If state semifinals, you win, you're going to the state championship game, and you guys just took care of business, really hammered them. And I remember the quote from the Belfry coach was, "These guys are brutes," and I think that's what a lot of people felt when they were playing Ashland. I mean, because the line was big, the backs were big. I mean, if you were not big, you weren't going to measure up against the Tomcats.
It was our 6th shutout of the year, and we rushed for 430 yards. And Belfry only had 27, and Coach Vipperman, Al Vipperman was our coach. He didn't say that. Tomcat brutes, he called us. Tommy Lyons had a big defensive night that night. That's the game that Smokey finally got in. We were really rolling now. We really were rolling. We were, Coach Hallam was worried because we beat Harrison County that we weren't going to be ready to play. But you know, we were on a 3-week high there at the end in those games, and there wasn't anything going to bring us down from it. And Belfry just got in our way. They were just a momentary bump in the road.
Yeah, 26-0 at halftime. So it was never close. It was, you know, and you know, on the other end of the state, E-Town kind of emerges. I'm not sure they were necessarily the favorite to get to the finals, but you know, they had a great quarterback, and they did not, you know, we talked earlier about how teams really mostly ran the ball, but not E-Town. They were the pro set kind of team, and Gary Inman, I think is his name, and he was tough, and you know, it was going to be a test for the secondary for you guys really in the state championship game. You know, we started this conversation with the championship game, but we didn't really talk that much about it. But we did talk about you guys being ahead 19-0 and maybe the perfect half for you guys, just to kind of carry on that momentum, I guess, that you built from the time you learned that, hey, we're in the playoffs, you know, and from then on, and certainly through the first half of this game, I'm not sure you guys played better football than that's probably the best football you played all year.
Well, I think the first half, there's no doubt we were in that game, and going back to E-Town, we didn't give E-Town a second thought during the year. E-Town, Mayfield, they was like they were in a different country way down there in the western part of the state. And we knew about Harrison County, and of course you know about Belfry, and you know about Lexington schools, but you know, we didn't. But if you look at their schedule that they played, and thank goodness we didn't look at it and study too much. They absolutely killed teams. They had 5 shutouts and averaged like 30 or 35 points a game. They didn't have a close game until Mayfield. They beat Mayfield in the semifinals, and I'm glad we didn't study that too much. It might have scared us off, but they were good, and thank goodness we did play our best game, probably our best half in the first half of that game.
All right. Yeah. Of course, they were undefeated coming into the game, 12-0, and you got up 19-0. They scored twice in the third quarter, actually, and they really kind of got their passing game going a little bit, and he connected with Jim Hartman on a 21-yard touchdown pass with 3:32 to go in the third quarter to pull within 19-14. So, you know, the momentum's on their side, and they're moving the ball. You guys aren't really, you know, at that point, moving it like you certainly were in the first half. And I know they're late in the game. I think they had an opportunity against you guys too. And you want to talk about that a little bit? You were involved in that, I think.
Well, I knew you'd bring that up. But well, you know, yes, they did, and they had all the momentum in the world, and it wasn't even the fourth quarter yet. But then we did get the ball back, and we had a long march that took I don't know how many minutes, probably 6 or 7. That took us down to about the 6-yard line, and we didn't get it in. We got penalized, and then I wanted to pass, and Coach Allen says, "No, we're going to run it," and we ran it down to about the 5 or 6 and fourth down. Well, now there was only about 2.5 minutes. I can't remember exactly left in the game, but yet they were on their own 6-yard line. Well, they completed several passes. Well, about in the middle of that drive, with probably about 40 seconds to go, Inman, their quarterback, had been scrambling a lot, and I was playing safety, and I had no business ever coming up to try to make a tackle, especially when it's passed. But I saw him break to come up the middle, and it was going to be open, and I took a couple steps forward, and I thought, well, I'm going to come up and make his tackle, and he stops, and he throws a pass over my head, and Joe Welch is the name of the kid. He was the 100-yard dash champion the year before. The spring before in the state of Kentucky. He was 25 yards behind me and wide open, and Inman overthrew him. And I've said my prayers and thank the Lord many times about that bad pass, because that would have won the game for E-Town. Well, the next 2 or 3 plays they had before it ended, nothing got me coming forward. I stayed way back there, and Coach Birch reminds me of that every time I see him.
But it was incomplete, so that's and of course you guys go on and win the championship. You know, I know, you know, I think anytime you win a state championship, it's so special, and I know you have such fond memories and such a good memory of of it. You know, how much of a part of your life is that still? Do you think? I mean, I know people put things away, and I get it. You know, I've talked to guys from the baseball championships and this one, and other things, and you put it aside a little bit, but really isn't that kind of part of you forever too?
There's the old cliches. Well, you've won this; they can never take this away from you. How true that is. In other words, that state championship is something that can never be taken away from us. We were part of something special. We didn't know that at the time. We didn't know how big it was for the city of Ashland. We didn't know how big it was for the school of Ashland Blazer. We just knew we were kids and playing football, and we wanted to win that championship and ride that fire truck. But that was what we knew. And now, as we've gotten older, at least as I've gotten older, I can remember, just like talking to you now, I can remember things from every game just like it happened. I can see it in my memory. I can remember details of it. Now, I played 4 years of college football. I can't remember much about those games. We had some good seasons at East Tennessee, but there's something special about that state championship and things that stay with you that will never leave you. And I'm sure guys from the 61 basketball championship and the guys on the baseball championship teams of Ashland and the 90 team can tell you the same things. There's things I can't remember about my children growing up, but I can remember about that 67 season for sure.
Yeah, it's an incredible year, and it's special. It really is in Ashland lore, I think. And I think even as the years go on, I mean, this team is so revered by people, and the people that watch them play. And I at one time I had a John Radjunas chin strap, but I don't know what happened to it. It's probably in a Hall of Fame somewhere, I guess. But anyway, that was a pretty cool thing for us kids. After the game, or when you guys were running back into the locker room, flipping those chin straps up in the stands and out on the field, giving them to the kids. And Ashland football is a great tradition. There's no question about it. And it's why people still want to play. They see teams coming up, and you guys were a great role model. I'm not sure Ashland will have a team quite like this one again. It's just the people that come together, to make that team, and the coaches. Gosh, we shouldn't leave this without talking a little bit. And I know we're setting a record here for this podcast, by the way, but Herb Conley was in his second year, and he was a young man at that point, like you say. Bill Birch, Herb calls him just like a genius. As far as scouting and things like that, and of course Jay Callum, was on that staff. And were there other, I know there were probably a couple others, right?
Well, Shorty Blanton, who was the JV coach that year.
Yeah, Shorty.
So it was just those four.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just those four people, which is, there's a dozen coaches now. But just the way the era was, And just to wrap it up, Steve Scott rushed for 1,211 yards. Paul Hill rushed for 1,110 yards. You guys rushed for nearly 4,000 yards as a team. You passed for 826 yards and 8 touchdowns. That's a pretty good year for a team that was sold on running the ball. You had some great passing nights. John, you were a great leader for them, and you're still a great spokesman for them, the best there is. And I want to thank you for how you helped me to put this book together. And if people don't have that book, they really, not because I wrote it, but just because it's a great story, people need to pick that thing up. And you can get it at J.C. Stewart if people want to purchase one, or call me and I'll get you one. But a great season, a great year in Tomcat history, and I just want to thank you for your time today, and it was fun reminiscing with you. It always is. I enjoy it so much.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I'd be remiss if I didn't tell everybody that Mark Maynard has helped perpetuate the memory of our football team through the book of Tragedy and Triumph, and we appreciate you and have made you an honorary team member. And somehow or another, I keep thinking I'll look in the stats, and you carried the ball a couple of times in some of those games. But I do do appreciate this time, and I feel honored to be a part of the podcast and being part of Tomcat history.
All right. That was John Radjunas, and thank you for listening, and I hope you'll tune in again. This was number 19 of our podcast, and it's with John Radjunas and the 1967 Tomcats. Great season, and we'll have more podcasts for you in the future, so stay tuned.